but it's a little bit terrifying. It's also a great change of everything. I was 22 years old, and everything that I was chasing was all that Michael Jordan had, or all that David Beckham had, or all of the famous people that I looked up to, all that they had. Big houses, big cars, big parties, beautiful women, big money, whatever that is. I wanted to live it all. I thought that that's what I was going there to do. That was my impression of what that was, to be popular, to have people know my name, you know. And I got to Chile, and quite the opposite happened. I wasn't respected in the locker room because I come from a country that's not supposed to be good at soccer, right? I also moved away from family and friends. I didn't have really any friends to speak of. And those first 6 months, I didn't know anybody. I wasn't on the field yet. And so things were difficult. There's only two things then that I even knew. Two things that never changed in my life. And I'll preach this till the day I die, but there was two things that never changed, and one of them was football. You know, I only practiced for 2 hours a day. I didn't know what to do for 22 hours. I had my own place. I remember unpacking my bags and getting into my own house and sitting there and realizing I've got nothing. I don't know what to do with my life, you know? And I felt pretty pathetic. I felt pretty empty. You know, as much as people thought that I was living my dream, I actually felt really empty. I didn't want to show that. I didn't want people to know that. We as men especially don't like to be vulnerable with anybody. We don't like to say that when we're lonely. And that's the first time I ever experienced loneliness in my life. I didn't even know what it was. I heard other people speak about it, but I had never experienced it. And at that time I realized that I needed something familiar. And this is what happens. This is why it's so important to teach our youth. Because you can only fall back on what you know. You can only fall back, you can only rely on the things that you know in your life, right? And so that's why it's so important that when we're young, that we build up virtue, that we build up those things that are so important, that my parents were insistent to taking their children to Mass, even though we didn't care. Because at that time, the only things that I knew, one was football. I only practiced for 2 hours a day. Well, guess what? I extended that to 4 hours. I would arrive an hour early. I would practice for 2 hours. I would stay an hour late. And everybody looked at me and thought, wow, he's a real good professional. They didn't know that I was just lonely, didn't want to go home. I didn't want to be by myself. Right? But nevertheless, it was something that where I felt at home, and I felt really at home on the pitch. You know, even not even being able to speak the same language, I could get along with the players. I knew exactly where I was supposed to be, where I was not supposed to be. I knew when coach was yelling at me, although he was yelling at me in Spanish, I had no idea what he was saying. I knew exactly what he was saying. Right? Whatever's happening in football, you know what you're supposed to be doing and what you're not supposed to do. And I felt at home there. Right? That was my home. The second place is the place where I went right after practice, where I was walking home. And that was the Catholic Church. Because I was brought up in the Catholic Church, I knew the Catholic Church. I knew that I was home. I knew that wherever I went in the entire world, that Jesus Christ was in the Eucharist. He was in the tabernacle. He was waiting. That was when my life changed. When I started to go to Mass, and I started just to be in the church by myself. I would go in the middle of the afternoon. There was no one there. Just an open door in a cold chapel with my coat on. And I would sit there in the middle of the Chilean winter in these rains, and I would sit inside. And for the first time, I was just speaking to the Lord. I've heard my evangelical Protestant friends tell me that they have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, who is their Lord and Savior, right? And asking me if I've been saved. That's the first time that I ever realized that I could have a personal relationship with Jesus. I thought that being a good Catholic was just punching the card at Mass on the weekends, you know? That was the only thing that it meant to be Catholic. And I think today that's the problem. Everybody thinks that if we just pray, pay, and obey, then somehow we're good. Nevertheless, that's not what Jesus wants for us. Jesus wants a relationship. It was in those times I just started dumping my heart out into the Lord. I just told him how miserable I felt and how empty I felt, and I was looking for something else. And I remember one specific day being there, and I was praying for comfort. And I was just saying, Lord, bring comfort to my life. Allow me to live my dream. Allow me to understand what I'm supposed to be doing here. And just in a moment, I heard the Lord for the very first time in my life ever speak. I heard in the depths of my heart, be my priest. That was not even on my mind. That's how I knew it was the Lord. I thought, this wasn't even a thought in my mind. Who would want that? I didn't want it. I didn't want to be a priest. As I told you at Mass tonight, I thought he had the wrong guy. I thought he was talking to the wrong person. And I certainly didn't think that because of the life that I had lived, and of course I don't think any priest believes that we're worthy, we'll never will be. And of course that's the truth. But nevertheless, I continued to play, and things really took off from there. After those first 6 months of being uncomfortable, I became a starter on my team. I won the respect of my teammates. That year, I played the most minutes out of anybody, not only on my team, but in the entire league. I made fast friends, of course. I started dating a really great girl. had a lot of parties to go to. A lot of people invited me to different things. I started to speak the language a little bit better. I started to pick those things up, and everything just seemed to be flying. Everything went well. And I thought the Lord was really answering my prayers, and of course He was. He just was showing me that I wasn't made for those things. And I think that was so important to me. I continued on. I changed teams, signed a new contract, went to a better team, which is always fun. Moved cities. And as I did that, I continued to chase after this dream of being the best footballer that I could be. I didn't know exactly where it was going, but I knew that I wanted to win a championship, which you know what that desire is about as well. And we'll see next week, right? But nevertheless, I continued on, and I had the opportunity actually to win a championship. I was signed in the first division, went to the second division, won the promotion in the second division, won a championship, and then went back to the first division for a few years. And so, just amazing the roller coaster. But in that of winning a promotion for a city was just phenomenal. And it was in that time that I realized, like, this is it. As I said tonight at Mass, this is it. I just felt this is the moment. This is what I've been waiting for. Now I'm finally here, right? I've been waiting for this for so long. I'm finally here. Like, I finally arrived, right? At that moment. And that was the moment that I realized, having spent, after 2.5 years of hearing that voice of the Lord in my life calling me to the priesthood, after 2.5 years I realized that there was something still missing in my heart. There was something that was very missing in my life. I still felt empty. I realized at that moment that my own dreams, anything that I had planned for my life, there was nothing that could be better than this right now. Yet that wasn't enough. That felt hopeless. But today it feels like the greatest hope ever. I'm so glad that I experienced that emptiness that it is to live your dreams and recognize that it's not enough. And I just warn anybody in here and warn everybody that I'm able to speak to, whatever it is that you rely on, it's never going to be enough. Young couples who are preparing for marriage, despite what the Jerry Maguire movies say or what Tom Cruise says in movies, your couple does not complete you. You will never be complete in the other. That's why people say, well, we're going to be separated, or we're getting a divorce. I say, why? We just don't fulfill each other. I say, no kidding. You were never supposed to. That's not your role. You weren't supposed to complete each other. Only God can complete your soul. Right? You have a God-sized hole in your heart. There's not a person in this world that can fill that. You're asking them to do too much in your life. If you think money is going to fill that hole, you're asking too much. You're going to be disappointed. If you think your job, if you think whatever, if you think food or drink or drug, whatever is your vice, whatever is something that you get a rise out of, it'll never be enough. Never be enough. And that is the good news. That's the good news. Once we figure that out, once we get that through our thick heads, that's when we change our life. I say that with conviction now, but I didn't always live with that conviction. It took me a long time. I have a very thick head. And it took me a long time to be able to be obedient to the Lord, to understand, to actually trust Him. And isn't that when we change? When we're able to trust Him? Most of us believe in God. I believed in God my whole life, even when I wasn't living my faith. I believed in God. I don't think I ever trusted Him, that whatever He wanted for me would be the best thing for me. I always thought I had a better plan than Him. I think most of us believe that too. My plans are bigger than yours. That what you want me to do, following the commandments, going to church, that sounds very oppressive. An hour a week is very oppressive, right? That is not what I'm... Why would I have to do that? Why would I just have to follow the rules? It's not following the rules. It's an invitation to relationship. It's an invitation to fill that God-sized hole in our hearts. That's what it's all about. And so once I actually trusted Him to say, yes, Lord, I actually trust You enough that I believe that You have a plan for my life and that I should follow those plans. I trust You. That's when I followed Him. It was in one of those nights after a week's long of partying, after winning that championship, and realizing I was so happy that this is it. This is everything that I've ever wanted. And then in a moment being honest enough with myself that it wasn't enough. That was never going to be enough. That my dreams, my plans, and that I had no other plans in my life. That was it. There was no other plans. And at 25 years old, and you have no other plans for your life, do you know how helpless that feels? Maybe you're 75 tonight and you have no other plans for your life. It's all right. It's not about your plans. You were never supposed to plan out your whole life. You're supposed to listen and receive the plans that were laid out before you. That's the peace that comes to our heart. And that was the experience that I had. And I said, Lord, okay, I don't know how You're going to do this. I don't even desire to be a priest, but I trust you. I trust you enough to take the next step, and that's often what it takes in our life, just the next step. You don't have to conquer the world in a day. You certainly can't win a championship in a day. You can't solve the problems in your relationship in a day. But you can be humble enough to take the next step. You can trust enough to take one step towards the solution. And if we do that every day, by the end of the year, we would have walked miles in the right direction. I came back to the United States. I called my agent and I said, I need to get back to the United States. It's just time for me to come home. Of course, I didn't tell anybody about wanting to be a priest. I was too embarrassed by it. I was embarrassed because it went against everything that I thought about manhood. It went against everything that I thought about greatness. And that's why it took me so long to accept it. As I told the kids yesterday, priesthood is the exact opposite of what we could conceive of real manliness and of real manly greatness in our society, all the things that I wanted. There's no big houses. There's no big cars. There's no big parties. There's no beautiful women. There's not a lot of money in it. There's no other purpose. You can't tell me that I did this for popularity. You can't tell me that I did this for any other purpose than wanting to be obedient to the Lord and wanting to live my life for Him. Right? And that was my conviction of being able to leave football. And so I called my agent and told him that I was coming home and I needed to be signed on in the MLS, and it was just time to capitalize. That's what I told him. It's time to capitalize on my career and make the MLS pay the money that I've always wanted. And thanks be to God, He sold me as basically a foreigner back to my own country because I had played so many years outside and was able to come back. There are many stories. Gosh, I wish, I don't want to tell too many stories just because it'll be a long night. But many stories of how all that was confirmed. But I came back to the States, and as Father asked me to tell the story about meeting David Beckham, on one of my last games, I retired July 15th. On July 15th, that was just after mid-season. I told the team that I wanted to end my contract at mid-season. And so one of my last games was on July 4th. And the reason I remember that, I don't usually remember dates, but the reason I remember that is because we were playing in Los Angeles that day, and of course the 4th of July in the United States is our Day of Independence, and so they were having a huge fireworks show after the game. All the people in LA were staying there, and they were having a show for all the people. But that was the day that we played against the Los Angeles Galaxy in the last couple of years of Beckham's career. And I don't remember much about the game. It wasn't memorable except for that we lost 1-0. I remember being amazed by Beckham. I don't know what the press is like here, and I know you certainly don't like Manchester United. But nevertheless, I remember all the press as I was growing up. We were all amazed by Beckham, but I remember the press always saying he's not as good as what everybody thinks. He's not this or he's not that. I remember seeing him and really respecting him that day. I mean, the way that he could whip balls in, the way that he could put balls on people's heads, on their feet, at any position, at any. It was different seeing him in person than actually witnessing him on television. And I remember shaking his hand after the game. Of course, I wanted to make sure to shake his hand and have that experience of him. And I say jokingly, he was taking off his jersey and walking towards me. And I thought we were going to exchange jerseys, but we weren't. He knew a guy on my team who we ended up exchanging jerseys with. He looked straight past me. He didn't even know who I was. And I remember shaking hands with him and just reflecting on that moment. As I reflected back on that, I remember at that moment, 3 weeks away from going to the seminary, or 3 weeks away from retirement, whatever that was, I remember thinking, at least in reflection, maybe not in the moment, but in reflection, I don't want anything that David Beckham has. And that reflection was very, and it had nothing to do with David Beckham, it had to do with me. It's something that changed inside of me. I didn't want, although I did go down to the car park and saw underneath his amazing car. And what, all the leather that was customized, his numbers in the headrests and all that. I remember seeing all those things and remembering, I don't really desire the big car anymore. I don't really desire the big house. I don't really desire to be popular. I don't really desire the big money. I don't really desire those things anymore. I just want to go away. I just want to do what the Lord is asking of me. And those things I know, I was convinced, and I am convinced today, that those things just don't fulfill me. Those things are just not even attractive anymore. He can have his house in Beverly Hills. I'm really not jealous, you know. I hope that you're not either. I hope you're not jealous of the footballers around here. But nevertheless, I'll say that those kinds of convictions, and I tell you that with all honesty, that now, like, being a priest is the most important thing of my entire life. It's the greatest gift, and it has nothing to do with me. As you can see, it was all about the Lord's work on me. If I had my own way, I would never be a priest today. And so I'm very humbled to say that before you today, that this is the greatest thing of my life, because it's the Lord's work, and it's Him who calls, it's Him who acts. And it's all just about me taking one step in the right direction, taking that one bold step to follow Him, to say, yes, I do trust you, and allowing Him to work through my life. And you're seeing the result of it. Us being here today is just so that I can share those things. I never knew that this was going to happen. I knew that the Lord had good plans, and He had a reason for calling me to the priesthood. And maybe it was for today, I don't know. Maybe there's more things to be done. I think there is. This is the Holy Spirit is poured out upon us. There's always more work to do. So we'll stay in that. So I thank you for having me here. I will take any questions if anybody has those things before I ask my parents some questions. Anybody have any comments?
When you decided, did you tell all the rest of the lads in the dressing room why? Did you tell the manager why you retired?
Yeah. So the question was, how did I tell the mates in the locker room or my manager or whatever? It was kind of funny because in my contract, this is a whole other story how this was played out. But I signed a clause that had an out in the middle of the season for whatever reason. It was crazy, right? So they called me, and it was because the contract needed to be renewed and re-signed on July 1st. And we were getting ready to go to LA. So I remember the week before them calling me, the general manager calling me and saying, hey, you need to get in here and re-sign your contract and all that kind of stuff. And that's when I told him, I said, well, there's something that we need to talk about. I said, I don't think I'm going to resign. Or I don't think I'm going to re-sign, right? Not resign. I don't think I'm going to re-sign the contract. What? What are you talking about? You know, and then he says, well, I said, well, there's something that we need to talk about. And I said, actually, I didn't tell this part, right? I said, I would like to talk to what you guys call the manager, right? The coach, right? I would like to talk to the manager. So he calls up a man named Stevie Nickel. You guys know Stevie Nick? Yeah? Ex-player for Liverpool, won Champions League. So he was my coach at that time. He was the manager of the team. So Stevie Nick gets on the phone, and I think his accent's hilarious, by the way. I think all of his comments are hilarious. I think he dropped the F-bomb on me that day. When he answered the phone, so we were on a three-way call. I didn't even go into training, or it wasn't even at training that day. It was on a phone call. And I said, I have to tell you guys something. And I said, I don't think I'm going to re-sign my contract. I said, I'm going into the seminary. I'm going to be a priest. And there was just silence. Silence on the phone. And I was like, hello? And that's when Stevie Nicky says, well, what the is that? That was my best accent, by the way. And so I had to explain, and he wasn't really worried about what that was, but nevertheless, he was so gracious, and there I was very surprised. I was living in Boston at the time, and I don't know if you've seen the movies or seen the press or whatever, but in 2002, when the priestly scandal started to break out, all the abuse scandal, Boston was the epicenter of that scandal. And so I was very afraid to tell the news that I had to tell in that place, that I was going to leave, because Boston is a crazy city for sports. It's amazing. It's actually a lot of fun. But their sports teams are excellent. They have a hockey team there that's very good. They have a baseball team that's excellent. They have a basketball team that's amazing. And then they have a football team, right, who's New England Patriots. If you've ever watched Super Bowl, will win all kinds of Super Bowls. And then they have the New England Revolution. And so as I tell this story, I'm thinking this is going to be terrible. I'm going to receive all kinds of backlash for freaking out. So I wanted to go silently. I didn't want it to be an example. But I'll tell you that just sharing that, I think it actually, and I've been told that recently that it's actually brought healing to those who are there, because they respect athletes so much. That they realize that if this man who is an athlete is leaving his sport to do this, it actually looks good for us, right? It heals some wounds that were around there. And I will say that those scandals were probably one of the major things that kept me from answering the call to be a priest. The last thing that I ever wanted anybody to say about me is that I was a pedophile. Yeah? Worst thing in the world. And I actually thought, I don't want to be associated with those men. I don't want to be associated with all those mistakes. I don't want to be associated with all that hurt and that pain and that brokenness and that scandal. I don't ever want to be associated with that. But then again, in a moment of grace, I remember the Lord speaking through that and speaking into my heart and saying, well, if good men aren't going to join the priesthood, then how are we ever going to get over it? Why do we have to take broken men into the priesthood? I tell this to parents a lot because parents think, well, my son's too good for the priesthood. Is he really? Too good to give to Jesus? What's too good for Jesus? Tell me that. What's too good for God's church? Should we give the Lord all of those who can't do anything else in their life? That's what people think of priests, by the way. Don't we think about that? Those who couldn't get a date? Right? Well, you could be a priest. Well, that's attractive to people, right? That's who you want to be your priest, right? Or those who can't make it in school, those who don't have any other talent, those who are socially awkward, those who are misfits or outcasts, or those we'll give them to Jesus. Why? Why don't we give our best? Do you want good priests running your church? I know a lot of people don't go to church because that's what they think of their priest. I don't like the priest that we have. He doesn't talk to me. I don't like the priest that he has. He's mean. I don't like the priest that we have. He's ugly. The people in Chile used to, I remember,